Assalamualaikum to everyone. Today we're learning how today we're learning reading skills. Let's get started.
I think I just read the same sentence 10 times in a row, and I still couldn't tell you what it was about. Maybe it is time for a break. Sorry. What I was going to say is, there's no point in reading if you're not taking in what you read. Before you even sit down to read a book or article or textbook chapter, there's some prep work you can do to improve your reading and comprehension. Preview the text so you know what you're reading. Okay, this chapter of my social studies book is about the Harlem Renaissance. I don't really know anything about that. I mean, I've heard of it. I know that Harlem's a part of New York City. Well, I'm going to learn about it right now. You can skim or quickly look over what you're reading to get an overall impression. Pay attention to section headings and words in bold. Let's see, writers of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes. Hey, I've read some of his writing. Take notes while you read. Use note cards or a notebook to write down important ideas. Hang on a sec. Take your time. Stop and reread anything that you don't understand. And jot down any words that you don't know. There's one, ragtime. That way you can look it up later. If you can put what you're reading into your own words, you'll know you can understand it. So, the Harlem Renaissance was a time that celebrated African American heritage and culture. And obviously, it took place in New York City, in Harlem. If you have time, it's a great idea to reread your assignment. You may have missed something the first time through. You can also go back over your notes to refresh your memory. I'm reading a textbook, but you can apply these reading skills to anything you read. Oh yeah, Moby and I like to make a movie in our heads. If you can visualize what you're reading, you know you're getting it. This helps a lot when you're reading a novel, like a book report book, where you have to keep track of a story and characters. When you're done with a reading assignment, there's nothing wrong with talking to friends, parents, or teachers about what you've read. Talking about a text helps you better understand it and form ideas of your own. You might carry these ideas over into a paper or presentation. Oh, and you can look up those new vocabulary words. Okay, Moby, ragtime is a type of jazz music that has a syncopated rhythm. Moby? Well, I'm going to get back to reading this. I don't think I mentioned this, but it's a good idea to find a quiet place to read your book. I'm going to the library.
Look behind you, I said. Where? He asked, looking over his left shoulder. Made you look, I laughed. I didn't know you were writing a book. All right, I'll wait until you're finished. Hey, what's this one? Dear Tim and Moby, I have to give a book report next week, and I don't even know how to begin. Help, from Kunichika. Okay, a book report. First off, you should try to take notes while you're reading. Write down your thoughts and opinions as they occur to you. Jot down any page numbers that relate to your notes. This will save you lots of time. You won't have to go back and reread the book. Before you start writing the actual report, you may want to make an outline. An outline is just a list that organizes your ideas into the order you want them to follow in the report. It's like a blueprint for the book report. Once you have your outline, you're ready to start writing. Start off with an introduction containing the title and the author of the book. You should also include a brief one-sentence overview of the plot. Oh yeah, make sure you underline the title of your book or put it in italics. If it's an easily described type of story like mystery or science fiction, mention that in your intro too. This is called the genre of a book. After your introduction comes the body of the report. The body is just that, the main part of the paper. It should include a description of the book's theme, setting, plot, and characters. The theme is the main idea or ideas of the story. Some examples of themes are the importance of friendship, or, say, the battle of good versus evil. The setting is the time and the place that the story happens in. The largest part of the book report's body is usually the description of the plot. Basically, the plot is what happens in the book. You don't have to tell the whole story in detail. Just say enough about the plot so that the rest of your report makes sense. Yep, you're right. You probably shouldn't give away the end of the story in your plot description. Your book report's reader might want to read it. Last but not least, you have to give a rundown of the book's important characters. The main character is called the protagonist. If the protagonist has an enemy, he or she would be the antagonist. No, you don't have to write about the theme first and characters last. It's really up to you, whatever order seems to make the most sense. Anyway, once you've finished describing those 4 main elements, you can write your conclusion. That's where you get to give your own opinions about the story. Did you like the book? Why or why not? How did the story make you feel? Would you recommend it? Oh, you're all done with your novel? Let me see. I think you might want to do some editing.
Dear Tim and Moby, what are hurricanes and where do they come from? From Josh. Good question, Josh. A hurricane is a type of tropical cyclone, a large swirling storm with strong winds and lots of rain. Tropical cyclones form over the warmest parts of the ocean. They start when warm water heats the air right above it. That makes the air less dense, so it rises. Cooler air rushes in to fill the space left by the rising air molecules, and the process continues. The ocean heats the air, it rises, and more air rushes in. This is what weather reports refer to as a low-pressure system. It's sort of like a big vacuum, sucking up air all around it. Good question. The cool air wants to travel in a straight line.
I'll be back in the next 5 minutes. Hold up. Huh?
But the spinning of the Earth curves its path. The high winds kick up the ocean, causing big waves and rough seas. Meanwhile, in the center, warm air continues to rise, adding more and more energy to the system. The warm air carries water vapor with it, which condenses into clouds and rain. As the system grows stronger, the low-pressure center becomes a well-defined eye. Even though the strongest winds happen right around it, it's always calm, and sometimes even sunny inside the eye. The storm is now a tropical depression, a massive system of wind rotating around a column of low-pressure air. Well, winds move the storm across the sea, and as long as it's over warm water, it just gets stronger and stronger. Once the winds reach 74 miles per hour, it's officially a Category 1 hurricane. The strongest hurricanes are Category 5, with winds over 157 miles per hour. In other parts of the world, hurricanes are called different things, like typhoons and cyclonic storms, but they're all basically the same thing. Right, I was getting to that. Hurricanes start to run out of steam when they hit colder waters or land. They end in a big old downpour. But before they're through, they can cause serious damage. The wind can rip up trees, destroy crops and houses, and push giant waves called storm surges onto shore. That can lead to heavy flooding, which is never a good thing. Unfortunately, we can't stop these storms from hitting land, but we can be prepared. In the Atlantic, hurricanes form from June through November. During this hurricane season, weather scientists called meteorologists keep a close eye on the ocean for signs of tropical depressions. Using satellite imagery, they monitor the progress of these storms. Once a storm gets strong enough, meteorologists give it a person's name. That makes it easier to communicate with other scientists and the public about this particular storm. Meanwhile, computer simulations predict what the storm's path might be. It's an inexact science, but the predictions help everyone prepare. If you live somewhere that a hurricane might hit, the National Weather Service will issue a hurricane watch for your area 2 days in advance. Once it's known for sure what the storm's path will be, a hurricane warning is issued 36 hours in advance. Watches and warnings give everyone plenty of time to get ready. Well, your family can get together and make a storm plan. Agree on a place to meet if you get separated during the storm, and write down any phone numbers you may need. Put together disaster kits with things like food and water, a battery-operated radio, a flashlight, and any medicines you might need. Be sure your family has a plan for evacuation in case it comes to that. And don't forget to include your pets in your evacuation plans. Some public shelters don't allow animals, so find out in advance what the rules are. Unless you're ordered to evacuate, it's best to stay inside your home during a hurricane. It may look like an ordinary rainstorm out there, but the winds can quickly gust up and knock down trees, electric lines, and other dangerous stuff. You may have to turn off your home's power, but you can keep up with the news on your radio. The last time we rode out a hurricane, we played board games by lantern light. Oh yeah, storms can leave behind all kinds of dangerous stuff. So make sure your parents say it's okay to go outside afterward. When you do go out, don't mess around with fallen trees and puddles. If there's a downed power line nearby, they could be really dangerous. I'd love some. Hey, are these pretzels from my disaster kit? Why are you lying? I can see it right there. Weirdo.
Oh yeah.
Hey everyone. We've heard from a lot of you with questions about returning to school this year. Dear Tim and Moby, I fell really far behind in my schoolwork last year.
I'm so worried and stressed about all the changes for this school year. It was impossible staying motivated to do my schoolwork at home.
When we go back to school, how do I stay safe and healthy?
From Jeanette.
Send help, Camilla. Thanks, Jaden.
Nervous, Alejandro.
And so on.
We hear you. All of you. This is a crazy time we're going through, and it's been rough on everyone. Plus, plans are constantly changing at different schools. It's a lot. No wonder you guys, along with every kid in America, are having a lot of feelings about it. So let's talk about ways to deal. When schools went remote last spring, we recommended sticking to a routine. You know, keeping to regular sleep hours, eating well, exercising. But let's be real. Even those of us who hosted a distance learning movie on BrainPop struggled to stay organized. Learning on your own is tough. If school is still virtual for you, structure can help you stay on top of your work. It'll also help you separate school time from the rest of your day so you're not working around the clock. You can start by dividing the day into short chunks. Write each of your major classes and assignments on a sticky note, then slot the items into each chunk. And don't forget lunch. Try to put stuff that requires major brain power early when you're rested. The afternoon is better for quieter things, like independent reading. Your work won't feel so overwhelming when you break it up.
One tool to make big tasks more manageable and to keep you motivated is SMART goals. They're a handy way to help you face challenges, like, say, returning to school this year. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So instead of setting a big, vague goal like, I'll get amazing grades this semester, you might say, I'll study pre-algebra for 30 minutes every day this week to earn at least a B+ on Friday's quiz. You've got to work your brain to strengthen it, just like a muscle. Try to adopt a growth mindset, the belief that with practice and hard work, you can get better. Everyone can. You're not stuck being, say, a terrible procrastinator or a failure at distance learning. When you hear yourself thinking, I can't, or I don't, try adding the word yet. So, I don't understand variables becomes, I don't understand variables yet.
And for kids returning to classrooms, I don't know the new routine yet. The good news is schools have been working for months to figure out how to keep you safe. The plans won't be perfect. Remember, this is brand new for everybody, including the grown-ups in charge. But the priority will be keeping the whole school community as safe as possible. That'll mean cleaning and disinfecting regularly and providing hand sanitizer, keeping desks 6 feet apart and cutting class size, opening windows to improve airflow and holding some activities outside, and setting rules about wearing masks. To cut down on mingling, schedules might be staggered, or the cafeteria or gym may be closed. Yep, beyond school rules, we can do a lot to protect ourselves and others. Wash your hands frequently, scrubbing with soap for at least 20 seconds. And if you feel even a tiny bit sick, stay home, please. You also want to cut down on sharing supplies and food, contrary to what you learned in kindergarten.
But sharing is a good idea when it comes to another area, your feelings. Based on this mail, it's clear you guys are feeling pretty emotional lately. Stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, maybe a little excited, or up and down. Some of you are feeling lost for all the things you've missed out on this year. All of that's totally normal. Whatever you're feeling is okay. Try recording your thoughts in a journal or talking it out with a friend. If you need extra support, reach out to a school counselor or another trusted adult. It can also help to practice deep breathing or meditation. Our mindfulness movie has tips. And to practice gratitude, noticing and appreciating what you're grateful for. Because despite all the bad stuff, there are always good things in your life too. The more you focus on what's good, the more it'll become a habit. Like, I'm grateful so many of you have written in to tell us how you're doing.
I'm grateful distance learning means more time to play with night gerbils.
I'm grateful for this cool cat mask that Tim made me.
I'm grateful for big rate reductions on my renters, homeowners, and auto insurance. Huh?
Dear Tim and Moby, can you do a movie about Thomas Edison? I think it would be very interesting. From Caitlin. Actually, Moby and I are visiting Thomas Edison's laboratory today. See, look, here's a design for the incandescent light bulb. And here's his phonograph, the very first record player. And here's... Hey, what the heck is this? You know this guy? So, steam guy, did Thomas Edison invent you too? Oh, you were just friends. Well, do you want to help us tell Mr. Edison's story? All right then. Thomas Alva Edison was born in 1847 and spent most of his childhood in Port Huron, Michigan. He wasn't a star student. In fact, he had only 12 weeks of formal schooling. Well, he was kind of hyperactive, and he asked a lot of questions. It frustrated his teachers, so his mom decided to pull him out of school and teach him at home. By the time he was 12, Edison had devoured most of the books in his local library and even started his own business. Port Huron was a big railroad town, and young Edison sold fruits, vegetables, candy, and newspapers to train passengers. Later, as a teenager, Edison left home to become a telegraph operator. Oh, the telegraph was sort of like a primitive telephone or radio. People used it to send and receive messages over long distances. But the telegraph couldn't transmit voices. Instead, people communicated with a system of electrical pulses. It sounded kind of like... Exactly. Anyway, many of Edison's early inventions were improvements to the telegraph. In 1874, the Western Union Company paid him $10,000 for a new telegraph that could handle 4 separate signals at the same time.
Edison used the money to set up his own laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, where he could spend his time developing new technologies. He hired some assistants and worked around the clock trying out new ideas.
Well, of course it looks familiar. We're standing inside it right now. Edison's first big success came in 1877 when he invented the phonograph. No, it wasn't that sophisticated. In fact, it recorded sound on wax cylinders covered with tinfoil. It wasn't perfect, but it was still way ahead of its time. And you can still play these old Edison cylinders today. After the phonograph, the inventions kept right on coming. There was a precursor to today's X-ray machines, an improved stock ticker, and even one of the first movie cameras. But Edison's greatest success involved electric lighting. Well, contrary to popular belief, Edison didn't invent the incandescent light bulb. But in 1879, he patented an improved version that lasted a lot longer than earlier models. More importantly, Edison figured out a way to generate electricity at central power stations and distribute it through power lines. The system he thought up gave homes and businesses access to cheap, reliable electricity. Edison eventually built his first power station in New York City and began supplying electricity to a growing number of customers. The power company he founded soon became one of the largest corporations in the world. Today, it's known as General Electric. Thomas Edison's innovations made him rich, and he became one of the most admired men in America. He died in 1931 at the age of 84. So what do you think, Steam Guy? Did I get all the facts straight? I'd rather not touch the antique phonograph again. It could break. Oh, all right. Wow, this is super weird. This again? How many times do I have to tell you? Birds aren't a government conspiracy. You gotta spend less time online. Dear Tim and Moby, I love birds. Please do a movie on them. From Tess. Sure, Tess. Maybe it'll convince Moby that birds aren't military spy drones. There are close to 10,000 different species of birds. They all have 2 legs, wings, feathers, and a beak or bill. They also lay eggs with hard shells. Like us humans, birds are warm-blooded or endothermic, so their body temperature stays the same no matter what the temperature is around them. This allows birds to survive in very cold places. Birds are also vertebrates. They have a backbone. Yep, most birds fly, and their bodies are built for that. Their bones are hollow, which makes them light. Many of the bones are fused together for strength and to support the strong muscles they need to fly. Birds are the only animals with a fused collarbone. You probably know it as a wishbone. It provides stability
responsibility for the bird's powerful flight stroke. Flight muscles also need a good supply of oxygen, so it makes sense that birds have an extremely efficient respiratory system. Those are the parts of the body that allow an animal to breathe. A system of air sacs helps birds provide enough oxygen for the flight muscles. This system also helps birds do that other thing they're known for, singing. Birds can make so many different sounds because they have a syrinx. It's kind of like the human voice box, but with double the parts. That allows some birds to do things like sing 2 different notes at once. They use their voices to send specific messages about things like predators or food. And songbirds, the best singers, belt out complicated love songs to attract mates. You can check out their skills after the movie by playing Bird Song Hero. Songbirds are such pros at singing that some can even sing while they fly. Outdoor cats are a big threat to birds. It's a good thing that one was able to get away. It all comes down to the shape of their wings. The top is curved, so air has to travel farther across the top than the bottom. As a result, the air pressure across the top of the wing is less than the air pressure underneath it. That difference in pressure creates an upward force called lift. Airplane wings work using the same principle. In fact, the Wright brothers studied birds to help them design the first airplane. Yeah, when it comes to flight, birds are hard to beat. Some travel tens of thousands of miles during their migration. That's the seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. The longest migration of any animal is made by the Arctic tern, 44,000 miles. Over a lifetime, they can fly the equivalent of 3 round trips to the moon. To navigate across these long distances, birds use a combination of senses, including one that we lack, which allows birds to sense Earth's magnetic field. Arctic terns fly from one pole to the other and back. Birds also gather information on their location from the position of the sun and stars. Lots of birds fly south for the winter, but not because of the cold. It has to do with the shorter days. That's a big part of how birds know it's time to go. Shorter days means less sunlight. And sunlight is what provides plants with energy to make their own food. Then, plants become food for other creatures, like, say, birds. So, less sun means less food, and therefore less energy for everyone. It's a challenge many creatures face, and birds often tackle it by taking off for somewhere sunnier. Migration can also help birds find a safe place to raise their young. They need somewhere with plenty of food for those hungry little hatchlings, and away from predators looking for their own easy meals. Right, baby birds can't fly because they don't have their adult feathers yet. In many species, males and females develop different colored feathers. Females tend to have more muted tones, which provide camouflage. That's especially helpful when you need to sit still on a nest for a long time. Brightly colored feathers usually belong to males to attract mates. So, feathers aren't just for flying. Fossils even show feathers on some dinosaurs that couldn't fly at all. Actually, today's birds are living dinosaurs. You may have heard that dinosaurs went extinct after an asteroid struck Earth. It kicked up enough dust to block out the sun, so Earth got too cold for most dinosaurs. But one branch of their family tree did survive. Birds split off from dinosaurs about 150 million years ago. Their warm blood and larger brains helped them adapt to the challenging new environment. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. Since then, they've adapted to live on all 7 continents. So, anyway, are you finally convinced that birds are real? See, now, why would the government make them do that? This movie explores a sensitive subject. Please watch this movie with an adult. and take time to discuss it.
Hey, what are you watching? Oh. Dear Nat and Moby, why are so many people protesting about racism? I thought we fixed all that stuff a long time ago. From Ethan. I wish that were true, Ethan. A lot of us are taught that racism basically ended with the civil rights era. That's when activists fought to extend equal rights to all people, regardless of race. We learn about brave leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. How they fought against segregation, the forced separation of black people from whites. How millions of Americans took to the streets in support of change. And how new laws were put in place to protect African Americans and other minority groups. It seems like forever ago, and it's tough to even imagine some of the scenes. Ordinary Americans throwing trash at the first black Major League Baseball player. Harassing a little girl named Ruby Bridges for attending a white school. Attacking people simply for eating lunch at a segregated counter. Today, most Americans agree that all of that behavior was just beyond terrible. We elected a black president twice, and who doesn't love Beyonce? So, we've changed since then, right? We must have put racism behind us. Well, I know that. I'm just speaking rhetorically. In a lot of ways, we have changed since then. Interpersonal racism, expressing bigoted ideas, is widely seen as unacceptable. Nowadays, these people would probably lose their jobs over this kind of behavior. But the protests we're seeing today aren't really about that sort of thing. They're about structural racism in our society, a built-in system of bias that makes life easier for white people and more difficult for black people and other people of color. It puts them at greater risk for poverty, unemployment, and disease. Structural racism is a factor in some disturbing trends. Black people are nearly 6 times more likely than whites to be imprisoned, and black men are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white men, like on May 25th, 2020. That's when a black man named George Floyd died in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was killed by a white police officer. During an arrest, Officer Derek Chauvin pulled Mr. Floyd to the ground. Chauvin knelt on his neck and stayed there for close to 9 minutes. Mr. Floyd said several times that he couldn't breathe, and after a few minutes, he lost consciousness. An ambulance was called, and George Floyd was pronounced dead at the hospital. After video of the arrest surfaced the next day, all 4 officers were fired. Officer Chauvin has been charged with murder, and the other 3 officers have been charged as accomplices. And protests have spread from Minneapolis to cities all around the world. Thousands of marches took place in the month following Floyd's death. These demonstrations have been overwhelmingly peaceful. Though, if you've been watching the news, you might think it's all been riots. News and social media tend to highlight what's most sensational, unusual, exciting, or scary stuff that gets people to watch. Well, the demonstrations aren't only about Mr. Floyd. They're about a pattern of violence against black people and a tendency for our suffering to go unnoticed. That's why Black Lives Matter is a rallying cry at these demonstrations. The phrase dates back to 2013 in response to a murder trial in Florida. 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot on his way home from a store. His killer wasn't a police officer, just someone who claimed Martin looked suspicious. After the jury found the killer not guilty, 3 community organizers started the Black Lives Matter hashtag because the verdict seemed to be saying that Trayvon Martin's life didn't matter. A year later, a police officer killed 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Brown was unarmed when he was shot multiple times. The officer wasn't charged. Protests swept Ferguson and spread throughout the country. That's when Black Lives Matter grew into a movement, raising awareness about senseless deaths that might otherwise have gone unnoticed, like those of Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Monica Diamond, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. The protests are calling for justice and accountability. So, Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that other lives don't matter, and it doesn't mean that Black lives are more special than others. It means we want our lives to be valued as much as anyone else's. Well, this isn't about blaming the police. When an officer abuses their power, that's just a symptom. The problem is much more widespread than that, which is why we need everybody's help to change things. And that's what these protests are about, raising awareness and calling for action. And guess what? It's already starting to work. In Minneapolis, the city council voted to remake the police department from the ground up. Other cities are thinking about similar measures. It seems like overnight, the whole country has woken up and realized what a big problem racism is. We're living through a huge historical moment right now, so remember it. 'Cause trust me, one day, your kids will be asking you about this. Throughout our history, movements like this one have led to leaps in progress, like abolishing slavery, getting votes for women, improving conditions for workers, and ending segregation. That's why protest is such an important American tradition. Uniting our voices in peaceful dissent, demanding that our leaders listen, and even making them a little uneasy. Because when people are comfortable, they don't see a need to change. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called that feeling of unease creative tension. In other words, protest should be peaceful as in nonviolent, not necessarily peaceful as in calm or soothing. Bringing about change in our society is an ongoing struggle. Each new generation has to take up their cause. Yep, that includes kids. Because we have a voice, and we can do amazing things with it. Mari Copeny began fighting for clean water in Flint, Michigan when she was just 8 years old. Emma Gonzalez, a survivor of the Parkland school shooting in Florida, has fought for tougher gun laws. Malala Yousafzai stood up for girls' education even after she was brutally attacked. Greta Thunberg has helped focus the world's attention on climate change. And let's not forget Darnella Frazier, the 17-year-old girl who recorded George Floyd's arrest. When we raise our voices to say something's wrong, adults listen. 'Cause, let's face it, kids tell it like it is. And believe it or not, adults are inspired by that. You can start by asking questions about things in your world. Is there something in your own community or school that bothers you? Listen to your inner sense of right and wrong. Because every change for the better starts with someone's conscience. So trust your own and give it a voice.
Ew, how'd that get in there? Dear Tim and Moby, how do you multiply and divide fractions? From Joe. You're in luck, Joe. We're gonna have to multiply fractions to get through this brownie baking mess. Okay, we're baking for 40 people? Better not be as bad as it sounds. Well, 1 1/2 kilograms of brownie mix will make enough brownies for 10 people. So, how many kilos of that mix will we need for 40 people? 40 tenths times 1 1/2. We can reduce that first part to make it easier. 40 divided by 10 is the same as 4 over 1. Let's get that 1 1/2 out of its mixed number form. 1 times 2 halves equals 2 halves, plus 1/2 is 3 halves. When you multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators and denominators separately. 4 times 3 equals 12, and 1 times 2 equals 2. 12 halves is 6. So we need 6 kilograms of brownie mix? You need that in grams? Okay. Well, 1 kilogram equals 1,000 grams. So we can multiply 1,000 by 6 pretty easily to get 6,000 grams. But I just told you. Okay, fine. I'll show you how to do it by dividing fractions. We'll start with our original fraction, 12 divided by 2. Now, to figure out how many grams that is, you can divide by the fraction 1 kilogram over 1,000 grams. Dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its multiplicative inverse. That's math speak for an upside-down fraction. To get that, you just flip it. 12 times 1,000 is 12,000. 2 times 1 is 2. And 12,000 halves equals 6,000. All right, Modi, it's confirmed we need 6,000 grams of brownie mix. You can't just quit. This was your idea. What? I'm working on my report for Mrs. Baxter. Why? Dear Tim and Moby, I want to know about the history of slavery in America. From Dwight. Unfortunately, slavery's history goes back to way before the United States even existed. Early records show that people were enslaved thousands of years ago in places like Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Even the ancient Greeks, the inventors of democracy, used enslaved people as household servants. But in the Americas, slavery was particularly brutal. Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors enslaved the native people who lived in Mexico and South America. Oh, conquistador means conqueror in Spanish. The British and Spanish colonists in North America enslaved native people there, too. But in the British colonies on the East Coast, they quickly shifted to enslaving people from Africa.
Beginning in the early 1600s, Africans were used for household help and farm work in North America. And the southern colonies built their whole economy around a slave workforce. They labored growing cotton, indigo, and sugar on large farms called plantations, while northern colonies became more industrial, so they needed far fewer workers. By the end of the 18th century, the African slave trade had stolen millions of people and shipped them to North America. The slave trade was a big international business. In Africa, people were kidnapped and traded to merchants in exchange for European goods. They were then sent to the Americas, where they were forced to work on plantations. The crops they grew were sent back to Europe, where they were sold and manufactured into goods. The system was called the triangular trade, and the leg between Africa and the Americas is known as the Middle Passage. People were chained together and packed like livestock into cargo holds. They often couldn't move at all, not even to go to the bathroom. Many got sick and died. Others tried to starve themselves or jump overboard to escape. Over 15% of the captives perished while on board. For those who survived, the excruciating journey took months. The first stop was the West Indies, islands in the Caribbean. Some enslaved people were kept there as plantation workers. Others were sent to America, where they were sold at auctions. Families were broken up and sold to different planters. Well, back then, many Americans thought that Africans were inferior people. They were judged because their skin was a different color and because they weren't Christians. Greed was a factor, too. Free labor made a lot of people very rich. Enslaved workers had no rights at all. Plantation owners could make them work all day without rest, beat them, and even kill them. It was all legal. You said it. But eventually, things did begin to change. In 1808, bringing slaves over from Africa was outlawed. Of course, there were millions of Africans here already, and laws had been passed to make slavery hereditary. That meant any children of enslaved people were enslaved too. So the system actually expanded as generations of children were born into slavery. But by the 1850s, most northern states had outlawed the practice. In 1860, the U.S. fought a civil war over slavery, which brought it to an end. During the war, Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation. He declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states were now free. And the 13th Amendment to the Constitution officially outlawed slavery in 1865. But the effects of slavery didn't end overnight. African Americans were treated as second-class citizens for the next 100 years. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s made huge strides toward righting those injustices. Since then, we've made a lot of progress, and we still have a way to go. It's up to all of us to work toward a society that treats people fairly, no matter our race or background. We're all just people, you know? You're people too, as far as I'm concerned.
Jefferson.
Why? Weko to kanan. Comment baru desa. Comment baru desa. Aye.
Dear Tim and Moby, who was Thomas Jefferson? From Houghton. Thomas Jefferson was one of the most influential founding fathers. He was the main author of the Declaration of Independence and served as the third U.S. president. Jefferson was born in 1743 to a wealthy family in Virginia. He loved books and was naturally curious about many subjects. When he was 14, his father passed away. At that young age, Jefferson inherited a 5,000-acre plantation. His family was part of the elite planter class. Much of their wealth was built on the backs of slave laborers. In fact, slaves helped construct Monticello, Jefferson's famous mountaintop estate. Many of the founding fathers were slave owners. It's not mentioned too often, probably because it's a little confusing, fighting for freedom while keeping slaves. It's a valuable reminder that the founders weren't perfect. Jefferson was a respected lawyer by the time he got into politics. In 1769, he was elected to Virginia's colonial legislature, the House of Burgesses. There, he spoke out against oppressive laws imposed on the American colonies by Great Britain. Actually, Jefferson was an awkward public speaker, but in writing, he was as eloquent as anyone who ever put pen to paper. His early writings argued for the then radical idea that people should rule themselves. Like many of the founding fathers, Jefferson advocated a republic, a form of democracy where people elect leaders to represent them. In 1775, Jefferson attended the Second Continental Congress, where representatives from most of the 13 colonies met to discuss the growing conflict with Great Britain. There, Jefferson was chosen to write a document explaining why the colonies were breaking away from Britain. In just 17 days, he churned out the first draft of what became known as the Declaration of Independence. It was presented to Congress in June of 1776, and the final version was officially adopted on July 4th. By then, the first battles of the American Revolution had already been fought. During the Revolutionary War, Jefferson served Virginia in the House of Delegates and later as governor. Later, President George Washington appointed him as the first Secretary of State. But he didn't get along with Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury and the leader of a new political party called the Federalists. For one thing, the Federalists wanted a strong federal or central government. Jefferson, on the other hand, believed that individual states should have more power. These differences led Jefferson and James Madison, another revolutionary leader from Virginia, to form a new political party, the Democratic Republicans. Washington continued to side with Hamilton, so Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State in 1793 and went home to Monticello. But 3 years later, he returned to the spotlight as the Democratic Republican candidate for president. He barely lost to John Adams, the Federalist candidate, but under the rules of the time, the runner-up in the election became vice president. Well, Jefferson hoped to be able to work together with his old friend, but he disagreed with many of Adams' decisions, like building up the military and imposing new taxes. In 1800, Jefferson rallied his supporters and ran for president again. This time, he narrowly beat out Adams to win. As president, he shrunk the federal government by lowering taxes, cutting down on military spending, and reducing the national debt. And in 1803, he signed off on the Louisiana Purchase, in which the U.S. bought a huge piece of land from France. This decision doubled the size of the country. The following year, Jefferson sent out the Lewis and Clark expedition. It returned a wealth of knowledge about the country's vast new territory. Something like that. Jefferson went on to win a re-election, but his second term wasn't as successful. He was focused on steering clear of the Napoleonic Wars. European powers had been battling Napoleon's French Empire for years. After merchant ships were attacked, Jefferson took a hard stand. He completely outlawed all exports to Europe. No, not a popular move at all. America's economy depended on exports. Jefferson was forced to reverse his position, but the damage was done. He chose not to run for a third term and left office in 1809. He kept busy making improvements to Monticello and continuing to write. He rekindled his friendship with John Adams, and the former rivals exchanged many letters in their later years. And in 1819, he founded the University of Virginia. On July 4th, 1826, Jefferson died at Monticello, exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Okay, next on our list is the Washington Monument.